inherited a $90 million mansion from my parents, but my greedy mother-in-law had other plans. She insisted I sell it for her business. When I refused, she came over with her son, tied up the security guard, and set my house on fire. They thought they had won, but the next morning, I got my revenge in a way they never saw coming. My name is Lena Harrison, and if you had asked me a year ago about my life, I would have said everything was perfect. I was 32, a successful event planner in Austin, Texas, with a job I loved, friends I cherished, and a marriage I believed in. My parents, both successful self-made millionaires, gave me everything I needed to build a secure future. After they passed away unexpectedly, I thought I could continue their legacy while building my own life. When I inherited their estate, including the $90 million mansion, I felt like I was living in a dream. It was more than just a house, it was a symbol of their hard work and love for me. I could still feel their presence in every room. It was overwhelming, but it also felt like the start of a new chapter in my life. My husband, Dylan, and I had always talked about moving into a bigger house one day, but nothing could have prepared us for what was about to happen. Dylan, a 34-year-old real estate agent, was excited about the mansion. When we moved in, our lives felt perfect. We spent our days decorating the grand rooms and our evenings walking through the beautiful gardens. For a while, it felt like nothing could ruin our happiness. But it didn't take long for problems to start. Dylan's mother, Margaret, had always been critical and overbearing. I thought I could handle her, but I was wrong. When she found out about the mansion, her attitude changed. At first, she acted friendly, but soon, her comments started to feel off. She made remarks about how lucky I was to have such a big house, saying it would be wasted on one person. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon, her comments became more direct. One afternoon, she said, "Lena, you know, I've always believed in good investments. With all that money, you could really grow your business. Real estate is profitable. I don't know why you're holding on to that mansion." I was surprised. This house meant so much to me because it reminded me of my parents. "I'm not ready to sell, Margaret," I replied. "This house means a lot to me." She smiled, but it didn't feel sincere. "I get it, Lena, but selling it and investing in something else would set you up for life. Think about it, real estate could change everything." I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't let it show. "I'm happy here, Margaret." But Margaret didn't give up. Every time we talked, she would bring up the house. She didn't understand why I wouldn't just sell it and use the money for something else. Her persistence started to wear me down, and soon, Dylan started to side with her. He became quiet during our discussions, and I began to worry that his loyalty was shifting. One day, Margaret and her younger son, Max, showed up at our door uninvited. I could tell something was wrong. Margaret's eyes were too focused, and Max looked angry. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Margaret didn't greet me. She went straight into the living room and said, "Lena, I've had enough of this. The house is a waste. You need to sell it and use that money wisely. I'm tired of waiting for you to make the right decision." I was shocked. "Margaret, this house isn't for sale. It's about keeping my parents' legacy alive. I'm not giving it up just because you think it's a waste." She smiled, but it was a cold smile, and for the first time, I saw something dark in her eyes. "You think you're the only one who can benefit from this inheritance? You think your parents would want you to keep it all for yourself? No, Lena, it's time to let go." Before I could reply, Max stepped forward, his cold gaze sending a chill through me. "Mom's right," he said. "You're being stubborn. This could be a big opportunity for all of us. Why keep something that's just sitting there, doing nothing?" I felt trapped, like their words were crushing me. "This isn't about money," I said firmly. "I'm not selling. This house is mine, and it means something to me." Margaret's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "but don't think I'll forget this." With that, she and Max left. I had a feeling this wasn't the end, though. I didn't realize it then, but I was about to face an even worse betrayal. What happened next would change everything. I wish I could say I overreacted, but what happened confirmed all my fears. I thought things couldn't get worse, but in reality, it was just beginning. It was a normal afternoon, or so I thought. Dylan and I were still settling into the mansion. I was upstairs, working on some event plans to keep busy. I didn't expect anything unusual, but then I heard a loud knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret hardly ever came by unless she had something to say, and after the last time we spoke, I knew she wasn't going to drop this easily. I opened the door and found Margaret standing there, her face red with anger. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask how I was. She stormed past me, staring at the mansion as if she could destroy it just by looking at it. "What are you doing here, Margaret?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she called out to Max, who had been hiding behind the porch columns. Max stepped forward, And that's when I realized something was seriously wrong. They weren't here to talk. "Margaret, what's going on?" I asked, a feeling of dread growing inside me. "Everything, Lena," she replied, her voice hard. "You've made a huge mistake by not listening to me. I gave you a chance, but now you've forced my hand." Before I could ask what she meant, I heard a loud noise behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of fire crackling. I turned around in shock. Margaret and Max were standing there, with Max holding a lighter, and flames were already spreading across the mansion's porch. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "This is the only way, Lena," Margaret said coldly. "You're not listening, so we'll make you." My heart pounded in my chest. They were setting my house on fire, the very house that represented everything my parents had worked for. I couldn't breathe, and I didn't know what to do. My mind raced as I watched the flames begin to spread, eating away at the edges of the mansion. My first instinct was to call for help, but I knew I had to do something more, something to stop them from destroying everything. I quickly ran to the living room and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I started recording the scene. I knew I needed proof, especially since I saw Dylan in the background, standing there, doing nothing. As I panned the camera, I saw the security guard tied up, his mouth gagged, unable to stop them. That's when the full weight of the betrayal hit me. My own husband, the man I trusted, was standing there doing nothing. He wasn't trying to stop his mother or brother. He wasn't trying to protect the house. He was complicit. The tears started to well up, but I fought them back. I wasn't going to let them see my weakness. I wasn't going to let them break me. In a split second, I made a decision. I ran to the back of the house and released my trained attack dogs. I knew they were my only chance to make them stop. The dogs were well trained to handle threats, and in that moment, I trusted them more than anyone. As soon as Margaret and Max saw the dogs charging toward them, their faces turned pale with fear. Without saying a word, they both turned and ran, leaving the fire to burn uncontrollably behind them. It all happened so fast, almost like it was in slow motion. I could hear the dogs barking, chasing them down, but it was too late. The fire had already taken over. I dialed 911, but by the time help arrived, half of the mansion was already gone. I stood there, watching everything crumble, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. This wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act to destroy everything I had left. But the worst part was realizing that Dylan had been part of it. He had stood there, doing nothing to stop his own family. They had all betrayed me, my own flesh and blood. The days after that were a blur. The police came, and I showed them the footage I had recorded, but Margaret, Max, and Dylan had already disappeared. They were hiding, avoiding capture. I couldn't believe it. My own husband chose to side with his mother and brother over me. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, heartbroken, and angry. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not after everything I had lost. I hired a lawyer, gathered all the evidence I had, and vowed to make them pay. I would get justice for my parents, for the mansion, and for myself. I wouldn't let their greed and betrayal win. But the worst was yet to come. The aftermath of the fire felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. The mansion was destroyed, my life was in ruins, and the betrayal stung. But I wasn't going to stop there. I had to fight back. I called a lawyer, Mr. Thomas Anderson, a calm and experienced attorney who specialized in property disputes and fraud. From the moment I met him, I knew he was the right person for the job. He listened to my story carefully, and after seeing the evidence, he nodded. "We can use this," he said after a long pause, "but we need more. If they're running from the law, we need to act fast." He was right. I had to focus on building a strong case. We gathered every piece of evidence, phone recordings, photos of the tied-up security guard, and any proof of their involvement. I knew Dylan's role in all of this was clear, but I still had no idea where they had gone. Dylan, Margaret, and Max had disappeared, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something worse. The police had been alerted right after the fire, but they were struggling to track them down. It seemed like they had gone into hiding. They were smart, too smart for me to catch on my own. I couldn't help but feel helpless. My own family had betrayed me, and now they were evading justice. I checked the news and police reports daily, hoping for a breakthrough. I even visited the site of the mansion once, looking at the burned ruins of my parents' home, where so many memories had been made. It was painful, but I couldn't let myself mourn yet. I had something more important to focus on: revenge. No, not just revenge, justice. Then, a week later, I got the call I had been waiting for. Mr. Anderson rang early in the morning. His voice was calm but urgent. "Lena, they've been found. Your husband, mother-in-law, and brother-in-law were arrested this morning at the airport. They were trying to leave the country." For a moment, I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. They had tried to escape, to avoid facing what they had done, but they hadn't made it. The police had caught them just in time, and now they were facing serious charges. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry, but in that moment, I realized this was my chance to make them pay. They had destroyed my parents' legacy and betrayed me in the worst way. Now, they had to face the consequences. The charges against Dylan, Margaret, and Max were severe: arson, conspiracy, property destruction, and more. The betrayal cut deep, especially knowing that my husband had been involved in it all. I had trusted him, and he had shattered that trust, but I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. The trial was looming, and I had to focus on getting through it. The trial was intense, emotionally draining, but I stayed strong. I testified, describing everything: how Margaret and Max had set the fire, how I had captured the evidence on my phone, and how Dylan had stood there, doing nothing. At first, they denied everything, but the evidence was undeniable. The court ruled in my favor, and they were ordered to sell their properties and compensate me for the mansion. The punishment didn't stop there. They were sentenced to prison, facing the consequences of their actions. It wasn't the outcome I had envisioned. No amount of money could replace what I had lost, but it was justice. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but the bitterness lingered. The betrayal ran too deep. Dylan, the man I had once loved, was now just a stranger to me. My family had abandoned me, and the house that had meant so much, my parents' legacy, was gone. The emotional toll of losing everything, not just the mansion but also the essence of what it stood for, was harder to bear than I had imagined. Yet, in the weeks that followed, I started to understand something important. I had won. I had survived. I had stood up for what was right. Even when the people closest to me tried to destroy it, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was a woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal and loss, ready to build a new future. With the compensation money from the court case, I focused on a fresh start. I didn't need a mansion to define me. Instead, I poured my energy into my career as an event planner, something I had always been passionate about but had put on hold. I built a new team, worked on exciting projects, and found joy in helping others create memories that would last a lifetime. But even more importantly, I focused on healing. I surrounded myself with friends who truly cared about me. They reminded me of the woman I had been before the chaos: strong, independent, and full of life. I reconnected with old friends and forged new bonds, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of the betrayal. I didn't forget the pain. It was always there, a reminder of what I had lost, but I learned to live with it, using the lessons my parents had taught me about resilience and strength to fuel my journey forward. The mansion might have burned to the ground, but the strength of my spirit had not. I realized that it wasn't the house that made me who I was, it was my ability to rise from the ashes. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a modest yet peaceful place, I looked out over the city skyline. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I thought about everything I had been through: the pain of losing my parents, the betrayal, the destruction of the mansion, and it all felt distant. What remained was a woman who had fought for her life, her dignity, and her future. The people who had betrayed me, Dylan, Margaret, Max, were no longer part of my life. They were facing the consequences of their actions, but the anger I had felt was gone. What remained was freedom. I was no longer defined by their actions. I was in control of my own story. I had rebuilt my life, step by step, and it was a life that I could be proud of. I had lost my parents' mansion, but in return, I had gained something far more valuable: independence, peace, and the knowledge that no matter how deep the betrayal, I had the strength to overcome it. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, I realized that I was ready. I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the worst, and now I could embrace the future with open arms. This was my new beginning, and I was more than ready to live it.